It began in places that felt completely safe. Quiet American neighborhoods where children rode their bikes until sunset and parents trusted that the streets were friendly. In a small town in Ohio, 8-year-old Jacob Miller was playing basketball in his driveway one summer evening. His mother watched him from the kitchen window while preparing dinner. But when she called his name a few minutes later, there was no answer. The basketball was still rolling slowly across the concrete, but Jacob was gone. No one in the neighborhood had seen a thing. Months later, nearly 1,000 miles away in Montana, 10-year-old Emily Sanders vanished while walking home from school. It was the same route she had taken every day for years. Her backpack was eventually found lying beside the road, perfectly zipped, as if it had simply been placed there. The forest surrounding the road was searched for days by volunteers, police officers, and helicopters scanning from above. Yet there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, and no clues pointing to where Emily had gone. Stories like these started appearing more and more often across the country. In Arizona, a boy disappeared from a crowded park in the middle of the afternoon. In Kansas, a child vanished while helping his father unload groceries from the car. In California, a young girl disappeared just a few houses away from her own front door. Each case shocked its community, filling local news stations with emotional interviews from parents who could barely speak through their tears. For years, the disappearances seemed like isolated tragedies. Different police departments handled their own cases, each believing they were dealing with a unique situation. Detectives chased every possible lead: kidnappings, runaways, family disputes, but none of the explanations fit perfectly. The strange part was how clean the scenes were. No witnesses ever reported suspicious vehicles. Security cameras rarely captured anything unusual. It was as if the children had vanished in the blink of an eye. As the years passed, the number of missing children slowly climbed into the hundreds. Posters covered telephone poles and grocery store windows across the country. Faces of smiling kids stared out from milk cartons and national news broadcasts. Parents formed support groups, holding candlelight vigils and hoping for any piece of information. But behind the growing fear was a terrifying realization. These disappearances might not be random at all. Something far darker could be happening, something no one in America had noticed yet. Fearful face. For nearly 2 decades, the disappearances remained scattered pieces of a puzzle no one could solve. Every state had its own missing children cases, each handled by local police departments with limited resources. Detectives worked tirelessly, interviewing neighbors, searching forests, and reviewing security footage. But because the cases happened in different states, sometimes thousands of miles apart, no one believed they could possibly be connected. The files slowly piled up in police archives. In Ohio, the case of Jacob Miller went cold after 6 months. In Montana, Emily Sanders' disappearance remained unsolved for years despite countless search operations. Across the country, investigators kept reopening the cases, hoping new technology or new evidence might lead them somewhere. But every time they looked again, they ran into the same frustrating problem. There was simply no trace of where the children had gone. In 2018, a young FBI data analyst named Daniel Carter was assigned to review decades of missing persons reports for a national database update. His job was mostly routine: sorting records, checking old case numbers, and organizing files from different states into a single digital system. But as he worked through thousands of reports, something began to catch his attention. Certain locations appeared again and again in the records. At first it seemed like nothing more than coincidence. After all, the United States is a massive country with thousands of towns and cities. But Daniel started mapping the disappearance locations on a digital map, marking every case with a small red dot. As the dots spread across the screen, a strange shape began to form, almost like a long, winding line stretching across several states. Curious, Daniel overlaid another layer onto the map: the country's railway systems, including many lines that had been abandoned decades earlier. The moment the map refreshed, he felt a chill run down his spine. Nearly every disappearance had occurred within just a few miles of one specific railway route, an aging line that cut quietly through forests, deserts, and forgotten towns across America. Train fearful face. When Daniel Carter presented his findings to federal investigators, the room fell into an uneasy silence. At first, some agents believed the connection might still be coincidence. After all, railways cross thousands of miles of American land, often running near towns and neighborhoods. But the more closely they studied Daniel's map, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. The disappearances didn't just happen near railways. They followed one particular route almost perfectly, stretching across multiple states like a hidden trail no one had noticed before. The railway itself was old, built sometime in the early 1940s to transport industrial supplies during wartime. Over the decades, large sections of it had been shut down as newer transportation routes replaced it. Rusted tracks now ran through isolated forests, dry desert valleys, and abandoned industrial zones where hardly anyone ever visited anymore. Many of the small stations along the route had been closed for years, their platforms cracked and covered with weeds. What made the system even more unusual was what existed beneath it. Old engineering records showed that maintenance tunnels had been built under several sections of the railway. These tunnels were originally designed for workers who needed access to electrical systems, drainage pipes, and structural supports beneath the tracks. Some were small, barely large enough for a person to walk through, while others stretched for hundreds of feet underground. According to official reports, most of these tunnels had been sealed decades ago when the railway lines were abandoned. But when investigators began visiting some of the locations listed in the old documents, they noticed something unsettling. Several tunnel entrances that were supposed to be permanently closed didn't look as untouched as the records suggested. Metal barriers had been removed or quietly shifted aside. Old locks showed signs of being replaced. Dirt paths nearby looked slightly worn, as if someone, or something, had been moving in and out of those hidden entrances more recently than anyone expected. The deeper investigators looked into the abandoned railway system, the stranger things began to feel. The tunnels were rarely mentioned in modern infrastructure maps, and most local authorities had completely forgotten they even existed. Many of them were located in remote places far from busy roads or towns. Standing near one of the entrances, agents could hear nothing but the wind moving through the empty landscape above. And somewhere beneath their feet, hidden in darkness, the forgotten tunnel network stretched silently through the earth. In the summer of 2019, a specialized federal search team arrived at one of the abandoned railway sites in a remote desert area of Nevada. From the outside, the place looked completely forgotten. The railway tracks were rusted and partially buried under sand, and the small maintenance building nearby had long since collapsed. If someone passed by, they would probably assume the location had been untouched for decades. But according to the old railway blueprints, there was supposed to be a sealed maintenance tunnel somewhere beneath the structure. After several hours of searching through the debris, investigators finally located a narrow metal hatch hidden under broken concrete slabs. The hatch looked old, but something about it didn't match the rest of the ruins. The hinges had been recently oiled, and the lock was far newer than anything else around it. When agents forced it open, a wave of cold air rushed out from the darkness below, carrying the faint smell of dust, metal, and something else they couldn't quite identify. Flashlights cut through the darkness as the team slowly climbed down a rusted ladder into the tunnel. At first, it looked exactly like the old blueprints described, a narrow underground corridor reinforced with steel beams and concrete walls. The air was heavy and silent except for the sound of footsteps echoing through the passage. But after walking for several minutes, the investigators noticed something strange. According to the maps, the tunnel should have ended after about 200 feet. Instead, the corridor kept going. The walls ahead looked different from the original structure. Fresh tool marks could be seen in the stone, and parts of the tunnel had clearly been expanded. Someone had carved new pathways into the earth, widening the corridors and reinforcing them with newer materials. Thick electrical cables ran along the ceiling, and every so often the agents noticed dim lights hanging from the walls, lights that were still faintly glowing, powered by generators humming somewhere deeper underground. As the team moved farther into the tunnel system, the space around them began to change. The narrow passageways opened into larger underground chambers that were never part of the original railway design. Wooden doors lined sections of the walls, and old storage crates were stacked in organized rows. It no longer felt like an abandoned maintenance tunnel. It felt like a place that had been built for a completely different purpose, a hidden underground complex stretching far deeper beneath the desert than anyone had ever imagined. Fearful face. As the investigators cautiously moved deeper into the underground complex, the atmosphere around them began to feel heavier. The tunnels stretched farther than anyone had expected, turning into narrow corridors that twisted through the earth like a maze. Every few steps, the agents passed locked doors and storage rooms filled with supplies, canned food, blankets, water containers, and medical equipment. Whoever had built this place had clearly planned for people to stay here for a very long time. At first, the team feared they were searching through an empty facility, perhaps abandoned years ago. But then something unexpected broke the silence of the tunnels. One of the agents suddenly stopped and raised his hand, signaling the others to listen. At first, all they could hear was the low hum of generators in the distance. But then, faintly echoing through the concrete corridors, came another sound. Voices. They were soft, distant, and almost impossible to understand, but there was no mistaking them. The voices belonged to children. The agents quickly followed the sound through a series of winding hallways until they reached a large underground chamber sealed with a heavy metal door. When they forced it open, their flashlights revealed a sight that no one in the room would ever forget. Dozens of children sat inside the dimly lit space, some wrapped in blankets, others staring silently toward the doorway. Many looked frightened and confused, shielding their eyes from the sudden light. Some of the children were very young, no older than 6 or 7. Others were teenagers who had clearly spent years in the tunnels. A few of them slowly stood up as the investigators stepped into the room, unsure whether to run or ask for help. Many of them seemed shocked to see strangers, almost as if they had been told no one from the outside world would ever find them. As rescue teams rushed into the underground network over the following days, the scale of the discovery became almost impossible to believe. Room after room revealed more children hidden within the tunnels. Some chambers contained small classrooms with chalkboards and desks. Others were sleeping areas filled with rows of simple beds. By the time the operation expanded across the entire tunnel system, authorities realized something truly shocking. Thousands of missing children had been living deep underground for years. Face screaming in fear. As the rescue operation continued, investigators began examining every corner of the underground complex, trying to understand who had created such a massive hidden network. The deeper they explored, the more disturbing the details became. The tunnels were not just random shelters, they were carefully designed living spaces. Some rooms had small classrooms with whiteboards and old textbooks stacked neatly on shelves. Others contained rows of metal beds, storage lockers, and medical supplies organized with almost military precision. The scale of the operation made investigators uneasy. Building something this large would have taken years of planning, expensive equipment, and a team of people working in complete secrecy. The electrical wiring powering the lights and generators looked professionally installed. Ventilation systems had been carved through the rock to bring fresh air deep into the tunnels. Whoever had built the underground facility clearly had knowledge of engineering, construction, and logistics. But the most chilling part of the discovery was what investigators didn't find. Despite searching every room and corridor, there were no clear signs of the people responsible for running the place. No offices, no identification papers, no personal belongings. Even fingerprints were almost impossible to recover, as if every surface had been deliberately cleaned. It was as though the people who controlled the tunnels had vanished moments before the authorities arrived. When agents began speaking to the rescued children, the answers they received only made the mystery darker. Many of the kids struggled to remember how they had arrived in the tunnels. Some said they had been taken while walking home from school. Others remembered being inside a vehicle for a long time before waking up underground. But when investigators asked about the people who cared for them, the responses were strangely similar. Most of the children said they had rarely seen anyone's face. Food would appear outside the rooms while they were sleeping. Lights would switch on and off at certain times each day. Sometimes they heard distant footsteps echoing through the tunnels late at night, but whenever they tried to look, the hallways were empty. For years, the children had lived in the underground maze with only faint sounds in the darkness reminding them that someone was watching. As news of the discovery spread across the country, the story quickly became one of the most shocking events in modern American history. Thousands of families who had spent years searching for their missing children suddenly received phone calls they had almost given up hope of hearing. Airports, hospitals, and reunification centers were filled with emotional scenes as parents finally saw their children again after years of fear and uncertainty. But while the reunions brought relief to many families, investigators remained focused on the unanswered questions surrounding the underground complex. Federal agents, engineers, and forensic teams spent weeks mapping every corridor and chamber inside the tunnels. What they discovered was far larger than the initial search teams had realized. The network stretched for miles beneath the desert, with branching pathways leading into areas that had never appeared on any official railway blueprint. Some of the tunnels seemed older, built directly into the original maintenance corridors from the 1940s. Others looked newer, carved deeper into the rock using modern equipment. Investigators noticed that certain sections had been reinforced with fresh steel supports, suggesting that the underground system had been expanded multiple times over the years. Whoever was behind the operation hadn't just built a hiding place, They had slowly turned the tunnels into an enormous hidden world beneath the surface. Despite the massive investigation that followed, authorities never found a single confirmed suspect connected to the operation. Security cameras near the railway sites showed nothing unusual. Nearby towns reported no suspicious construction activity over the years. Even satellite images revealed very little, since most of the work had taken place deep underground. It was almost impossible to imagine how such a massive project could have been carried out without anyone noticing. During the final stages of the search, one discovery left even experienced investigators unsettled. In the deepest part of the tunnel network, agents found several narrow passageways that continued far beyond the areas where the children had been kept. These tunnels were darker, older, and barely explored. When search teams tried to map them, their equipment showed that the corridors extended much farther into the earth than expected, disappearing into sections of the underground system that no one had entered yet. I face screaming in fear. Even today, the mystery remains unsolved. The children were brought back to the surface, reunited with families who had waited for years, sometimes decades, for a miracle. The tunnels were eventually sealed by federal authorities, and the abandoned railway sites were placed under heavy surveillance. Official reports closed many parts of the case, but the biggest questions were never truly answered. Who built the underground complex? Who kept thousands of children hidden for so many years without being seen? And why did they suddenly disappear without leaving a single trace behind? Investigators still return to the case from time to time, hoping that new technology or forgotten evidence might reveal the truth. But so far, the deeper secrets of the tunnel network remain buried beneath layers of rock, silence, and darkness. And perhaps the most chilling part of the story is this. Some of the deepest tunnels that agents discovered were never fully explored, which means somewhere far beneath the earth, beyond the sealed entrances and forgotten railway lines, there may still be corridors stretching into the darkness, corridors that no one has walked through yet. And the question that continues to haunt investigators is simple. What else might still be hidden down there?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.